basically they decided to not have practice, which is a little odd, but apparently a lot of teams around the league decided to do the same. It's like everybody decided to take the day off. A lot of teams today just figured, hey, so what's the thinking behind it? Doug hasn't really done this before, this early in the season anyway. But I would imagine with all these injuries, they've got, they're trying to be cognizant. Doug had said today during the presser that, hey, if we had a practice day, a lot of guys wouldn't have been able to go.
Right.
So we decided to bag it, I guess.
It makes sense. I mean, they probably have that blue 10 up on the sideline still. Come on. Not enough pads to go around.
Let's bring John McMullen in, get his reasoning for what Doug's thought was today. And I know a lot of teams around the league kind of followed suit today. It was a walk-through day at the NovaCare instead of a practice day, which Wednesday typically is, John.
Yeah, very strange for this early in the season. And Doug has done it in the past. He did it week 16, week 17 last year, for example. He scaled back. And we joked at the time they didn't think they could win games anyway. And so they've done it pretty consistently. I think they've gotten a little bit confident in the fact that they can do it, and other teams can't. Because there's so many veteran players on this team. So I think the bigger surprise was around the league. Frank Reich did it, and also Matt LaFleur did it in Green Bay. So it's kind of a weird new trend.
Yeah, it seemed that one team did it, then all of a sudden it was like another team was doing it. He did say, though, today that we got guys that are nixed up who have a chance to play, and he wants to get them ready to go. So do you feel that some of these guys – that we've been discussing, Deshaun Jackson, Alshon Jeffrey, we know Jernigan's not, but Corey Clement, Dallas Goedert, was this to try to get some of those guys ready to go for Sunday?
No. I mean, the vast majority of that group is not playing. Tim Jernigan is certainly not playing. Corey Clement, I think, is doing better than people expected. He feels like he could play, but he acknowledged today that basically he's not going to play. And then Deshaun and Alshon, they're not going to play. They're probably not going to play against Green Bay. So I think the one guy, maybe there's sort of a little bit of chance is Dallas Goedert, because we're not quite sure. At least I didn't see him in the locker room, so I didn't get a chance to talk to him. I have to check if other people did. But other than that, none of these guys are going to play. So the questions become, and I think you had some conspiracy theories about Carson not being healthy, and he got hit pretty significantly. He certainly looked like he at least hurt his ribs a little bit. We had the concussion frustration over the protocol. So he took a lot of hits, but he seems fine. He said he'd be sore, but he'd be fine. I think that's the case. So to me, the question is, yeah, okay, these guys are banged up, but the guys who have to play, specifically J.J. Arcega-Whiteside, Matt Collins, don't they need reps? Don't they need Wednesday reps with the quarterback?
Yeah, it's almost as if he said, my main guns aren't going to be able to go, so therefore I don't want to practice.
Right.
And they did practice. So I see constant headlines that cancel practice. They didn't cancel practice. They had a walkthrough and what they call a speed-up walkthrough, which I think they might get in trouble with the league, by the way, because they closed it to the media. And there's some sort of, I don't want to say assertions, but at least some people thinking that that's the reason, because they didn't want visuals of injured players not being able to practice. But I don't know that to be the case, but they did practice. It was just a walkthrough, and they called it a speeded up walkthrough. So it was more than a typical walkthrough, but less than a typical Wednesday practice, which is on a normal NFL week, generally the most important practice of the week.
So J.J. Arcega-Whiteside here is going to be one of the primary receivers, assuming that A.J., D-Jax, and Dallas Goedert are all going to be knocked out of the game against the Lions this week. How much can he get up to speed this week with Carson and the plays he'll be running? He's no longer pretending to be Julio Jones in practice. He's one of the primary guys. How much faith do you have in him maybe surprising some people or picking everything up how he needs to?
Well, I think it would. I think it would be more helpful if he could practice. So, I think it would be helpful for a rookie to go through a typical NFL practice when he's going to be scheduled for his first NFL start. So I think that's the other side of the coin today. I do think he'll play better just from the standpoint of what you just said. Last week he was on the scout team. This week he will actually be focused on in the game plan, so they will be running plays with JJ in mind. So I think that alone, there should be a certain improvement. And I think there's a chance he could surprise some people. He's a very talented player, so it's just like any rookie. There's going to be some mistakes and some hiccups, but he's got a lot of talent, and sometimes talent just wins out, and you're able to make some plays.
So no 12 personnel potentially now with Dallas Goedert out. We'll see what happens with that. If you're Doug Pederson, John, what's your game plan here to put together? How do you get the run game going or feel comfortable about the run game? How is your passing attack going to make you feel good at night if you're Doug Pederson? What does he do with the tools he has in his tool chest here?
Well, I mean, it's going to be a lot of 11. A lot of times I've talked with Jeff about this in the past sometimes as well, and I think sometimes we overrate personnel groupings. It's just you're basically defining the players on the field by the positions they're labeled at. So in essence, what's the difference between 11 personnel if you have 3 receivers on the field and 12 personnel if Zach Ertz is playing a flex tight end? Is essentially a slot receiver. It's just a different type of player playing the slot position. So, look, that's what Doug was explaining when he talked about the cut down to 53. We're going to play our best players available. So if that means Dallas Goedert can't play and you only have one tight end, well, that means you're going to play more receivers because they think JJ and Mac Hollins are better than Alex Ellis, or even if you were to bring up a Josh Perkins later in the season, they just feel they're better players. So I think what they have and what available, you're going to see mainly 11 personnel.
John McMullen with us, of course, Football at 4, looking at all the NFL stuff. A lot of Eagles stuff to dive into today, including, this is a team that, I don't know, the secondary gets questioned a lot. And, of course, anytime, as you kind of hinted at on the Monday Night Countdown to Kickoff show, anytime there's a big name out there, the Eagles fans want Howie to make that call. And a little bit of that's because Howie always does make the call. But to you, does the Ramsey stuff hold any merit with this team, this roster, this scheme that Jim Schwartz runs?
Yeah, I don't understand that narrative of Schwartz can't use Jalen Ramsey. I mean, he'll be happy to have the best cornerback in football if they're able to get him. To me, the issues are from Howie's standpoint, it's going to cost a lot. You look at Minkah Fitzpatrick, I think it starts at a first-round pick and you move on from there. So what is it going to be on top of that? Is it going to be a second-round pick, a third-round pick? They claim they want 2 first-round picks. Can you throw in a player like Rasul Douglas? But there's no question the Eagles are interested. They understand how badly their cornerbacks have performed early in the season. I think there's hope that they will improve as the season goes on, starting with Ronald Darby, getting healthier, getting more comfortable. So I don't think they need him necessarily, but if you have an opportunity to get a player like that, everybody should be making that call in this league if they have the wherewithal and the capital to get it. Because if you're the Eagles, we had this discussion with Fitzpatrick. If you're the Eagles and you're as good as you think you are, there's not even a modicum of chance you get a player like Jalen Ramsey in the draft. So then you have to weigh how much on top of it are you giving up and how much the value is. Plus, you're going to have to pay him a whole heck of a lot of money when the extension is worked out.
John, when the Eagles' defense was really clicking and at its best over the past 2-3 years, it was the defensive line getting a lot of pressure into the opposing team's backfield, and they have to release the ball quicker. They can't get into their routes and their plays. Is that the case right now when we're talking about the concerns, air quotes, in the secondary? For me, I think it's the defensive line right now that needs to pick it up a little bit. Are you keying in as that being one of the main reasons? Lack of pressure, the injuries, everything else that's piling on.
Well, it's always a combination. Jim will always say that, number one. If you ask me what the bigger part of the combination is, it would be the corners rather than the defensive line. Everybody could be a little bit better. I know people are obsessed with sacks. People love that number, and the Eagles haven't gotten them. So the perception is they don't have a good pass rush. Well, it's been okay from a pressure standpoint. They just haven't gotten home. Derek Barnett, for instance, I think is second in football to Myles Garrett in pressures through 2 games. But, one guy's got, what does Myles have, 4 or 5 sacks, and the other guy's got 0. So people look at Myles and say, well, that's a success. And Barnett's getting almost the exact same level of pressure, but he hasn't been able to finish. Brandon, that's been the story of him his entire career. He's been the best Eagles defensive player so far this season. He's been great. He's been one of the best edge players in this league. He doesn't get sacked. And part of it is, I don't want to downplay finishing because I think it is a skill, but there is a second part in that there are certain defensive coordinators in this league, and they're all tremendously successful, by the way, who preach discipline on the pass rush. And they disdain freelancers. And freelancers tend to get big sack numbers. The best example of that here would be Jason Babin back in the day, who didn't do anything he was supposed to do. But people loved it because he'd get to the quarterback. Jim runs a tighter ship, and he runs a fundamental ship. And his bigger concern is keep your rushing lane, do what you're supposed to do on this rush, and whether it's pressuring the quarterback, whether it's moving him off his spot, whether it's hurrying him up, whether it's forcing him to throw the football away, or an interception on the other end, the goal is to stop him. So the goal isn't to get a sack.
He's John McMullen at JF McMullen. Football at 4. A lot of Eagles stuff to get into here. Let's go back to the offensive side. And Jackson and Jeffrey are out. What do you see as the configuration? Is someone coming up from the practice?
They're not officially out.
No, I said if. I said if they are. What would you see as? I mean, do they move Nelson out of that slot because they got to bring someone else off that prop? A Greg Ward, does he get into play? I mean, what does that wide receiving core look like on a Sunday if those two don't go?
Well, I think they are going to need a body. Because they are out, by the way. I was joking, even though the Eagles won't label them. They're not going to play. And so they are going to need a body. The indication, if they were going outside the organization, they would have made something. They would have signed somebody by today for today's practice, although they scaled it back. So that's an indication, a strong indication. They will bring somebody up from the practice squad. That's already here. That's either Greg Ward or Marcus Green. You would have to believe that Greg Ward, who's been here for 3 years, is ahead of Marcus Green, so he would be the most likely scenario. But as far as Nelson, yeah, I think they're going to play him outside, and I don't like it. I don't think he's comfortable outside. I don't think that's the best spot for him. But when you don't have those two guys, they consider him the third best receiver. And I there was a year in Green Bay where Jordy Nelson was an all-pro, and then he tore his ACL. And he was one of the top 5 receivers in football at the time. And the Packers were unbelievable because Randall Cobb was the slot receiver. I think it was a young Devontae Adams as the third receiver. And then Jordy Nelson went down, and everybody had to go up a peg. And Randall Cobb was awful outside the numbers. Devontae was a rookie player who didn't understand how to play yet and couldn't handle the number 2 spot. So when you move players off what their usual roles are, there's a lack of comfort and bad things can happen. And I don't think they should play him outside, but I think they will.
Have we asked you about Jordan Matthews yet? Because that talk has been growing, online and Twitter, your favorite place.
Well, we all know why. I blame Elliott Shore-Parks, but they would have brought him in today.
Right.
I mean, the only thing, the last time he was brought back, I don't have a problem. If you have a need, I mean, he knows this offense. For short term, I wouldn't have an issue with it. Is he going to be a contributor with this team? No. So, I mean, it's kind of what do you want? A veteran guy who could probably go in there and do something with a couple practices, or a guy who's been working hard all summer behind the scenes on the practice squad. Like I said, the fact that they haven't made the move, I think if they were going to make a move, it would have been made today. Mm-hmm. And it's still early. Maybe they'd do it.
Yeah. We kind of pontificated the other day regarding the first 15 plays, the opening drive of the first quarter, and we kind of threw some theories out and whether or not who's to blame for the fact that they don't score in the first. And, I had kind of thrown out, well, they defer a lot, which means they don't get the ball to start the game a whole heck of a lot. They might only have the ball once in the first quarter. Do you have a reason or a finger to point as to why this team has been so slow to start in the recent past?
No. And if they had a finger on it, they'd change it. I mean, they just been bad.
If the finger's to point at Doug, maybe Doug doesn't want to point the finger at himself.
No, he points the finger at himself.
Okay.
I think the other day he said it was on him. He went all Andy Reid on us.
I heard that.
Yeah.
Got to do a better job.
Yeah. I think part of it, to be honest, is I said this the other day on Countdown to Kickoff. I think the first comp ever made when Carson Wentz was drafted was to Brett Favre here as the type of player he was. It is. And I don't want to make that comparison because Brett's a Hall of Famer. But you could see from the trait standpoint, the skill set standpoint, I think there are a lot of comparisons. And one of them is Brett used to be really inaccurate at the beginning of games. He used to get really hyped up. And there were some ugly early drives. And then he was so good. He was so talented. He could extend plays. He would just wear on the opposing defense. You could play good defense for a quarter, 2 quarters, even 3 quarters, and eventually he was going to make this Houdini back-breaking play, and the opposing defense would sort of slump their shoulders and say, here we go again. I see a lot of that in Carson Wentz, a lot of that similarities. And I think he gets a little bit too hyped up early. I think there's some inaccuracy. Like I said, I throw this particular game out because of what happened with the injuries. But it has been a long time. And when he's on the field, I think that's part of it. But the back end's pretty good. So I think sometimes you just have to take the good with the bad. And if the good outnumbers the bad, you're in good shape.
By the way, the Eagles sent out a injury report about 10 minutes ago, and it says, note, the Eagles had a walkthrough. Today's injury report is an estimation. Like the whole 53-man roster's on this thing.
Yeah, they got beat up. They got beat up bad. Like I said, Doug has done this in the past, but last year was week 16, week 17, at the end of the season. And to do it in week 3, it's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, they got beat up.
And Green Bay is another team. Green Bay, they're playing next Thursday. They also did the walkthrough today, as did Frank Reich in Indianapolis, a former, Doug guy. So it's like they got on the phone and said, hey, we're playing you in 2 weeks. Let's both not practice today.
Well, part of it is, the quick turnaround. That's part of it as well. I don't think you would have seen it if you had a typical Sunday. You have Sunday, Thursday. So that led into it from an Eagles perspective as well. And they're just beat up. But I keep going back to, okay, you're beat up. A lot of key players are beat up. Unless you're talking about Carson and Zach Ertz. The other guys aren't playing. They're not playing, even though you might not want to let that on. Don't the young guys need the reps? That's, I guess, Doug has answered no.
All right, we'll see what happens with this team tomorrow and who's out there. Today did not participate at all in the walkthrough. Clement, Goddard, Jackson, Jeffrey, Jernigan, Mailata. Limited today was Barnett, Fletcher, Cyprian, Rudy Ford, Nate Geary, and Camus. So Camus being limited, I guess, is some news, right?
Yeah, that's the first time.
And
he's
full
been
participation,
back in anything.
real quick, full participation was Sudfeld.
Yeah, and Nate was back at practice last week, so he's coming on. And that's where we're at week 3, so we said 2 to 4 weeks for Nate, probably closer to 4 weeks for Camus. So we're getting closer. As far as Nate, Josh is going to be the backup quarterback anyway, so as long as he's healthy. So I don't think that changes anything. But Camus, that will be a big body to get back because I think the Eagles will start playing more typical 2 linebacker packages in the nickel when he does return.
All right, football at 4 at JF McMullen. John McMullen, don't forget tomorrow he'll be back with the updates on the Eagles and countdown to kickoff Thursday night edition. Tomorrow night at Screwballs, you'll hear from him there. Plus on the Sunday countdown to kickoff show, the Eagles and the Lions. We've got you here on 97.3 ESPN. All right, Johnny, appreciate it.
All right, thank you, guys.